Chapter 1, Part 2. This morning was a little different from other mornings. It was Saturday the 30th of November of 1957, and normally Mum would be cooking in the kitchen. The radio station would be broadcasting some serial drama program. Since there were no television stations in the country, all of our shows were made for and broadcast through the radio. Dad was not at his workstation as usual. In fact, the house had a quietness that was unusual for a Saturday. Only the noisy racket of the birds outside could be heard throughout the house. My sister Liz was standing on a chair leaning on the windowsill playing with a raggedy doll that had only one arm and one eye. The long hair was still intact, and she was busy combing and grooming the doll's hair so intently that she was quite startled when my 3-year-old sister Bernadette, who was sitting on the rug on the floor below, began crying. It seemed that she was playing with several rolled-up socks, moving them from one side to the other in some sort of monotonous ritual, when one rolled far out of her reach. Liz, who was just 5 years old, jumped off the chair and quickly assessed the situation and retrieved the missing sock. She had a resigned countenance about her, as though she knew that her new role in being big sister to Bernadette would be a long one. She had just finished checking the baby's crib and had explained to her sister that today they would be having a baby brother, and warned her to be on her best behavior, otherwise the baby would die. Liz knew that on Tuesday last, Mum gave birth to a baby boy, and that unlike the last 2 occasions when Mum came home without the baby, this time was going to be different. One baby boy, who would have been older than Bernadette, lived only a few hours and didn't even have a name. And last year, baby Paul died after 3 days. So Liz never got a chance to meet him. But this time, when Dad left this morning with the taxi to go to the hospital to collect Mum and baby brother Peter, he had promised her that she would get to touch her brother when they got home. She was getting impatient, as the 3 hours since Dad left seemed like a very long time. Every time she heard a car passing, she would hop on the chair, and when it wasn't the taxi, she would quietly play with her doll on the sill. She was just trying to get Bernadette to stop crying when she heard the distinct sound of a car. So up she hopped onto the chair, and the excitement of seeing the taxi in front of the house made her drop the doll and almost fell off the chair. She ran to the stairs but remembered her sister. She tried to lift her, but she was too heavy, so she grabbed her by the hand and almost dragged her to the stairs. Bernadette was crying, but Liz somehow managed to get them both downstairs. Dad should have been at the door by now, because she heard the taxi leaving when they were still halfway down the stairs. She stood on tiptoes and peered through the open window, but she couldn't see anyone in the front. She was beginning to get worried when she heard a noise at the side of the house. Running to the side window, she saw Mum holding the baby, Dad by her side of the fence, and on the other side were our neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Mondina, and some other people that she didn't recognize. They were talking and laughing, and suddenly Dad took the baby and passed it over the fence to Mr. Mondina, who gave it to his wife, and then everyone crowded round the baby. It seemed like a long time before she noticed that Dad took out what looked like a coin from his pocket and handed it to Mom, who in turn passed it to Mrs. Mondina. She took the 25 cents and then passed the baby over the fence back to Mom. Later, Mom was to explain that the superstition was that, since 2 baby boys had died in infancy, and in order that this one will live, she must give away the baby and buy him back for 25 cents before bringing him home. And this is why her brother did not die in infancy. Mom went straight to the Burby's chair with the baby. In the excitement to see her baby brother, Liz almost pulled the blanket with the baby from Mom's arms and got a mild scolding, but was allowed to touch. She was transfixed with a look of wonderment in her eyes as she gingerly touched the tiny baby, who seemed to be asleep. Curiosity got the better of Bernadette. She stopped crying and was also begging to see the baby. Dad went to the kitchen to get dishes, since he had picked up food from a restaurant in celebration of this day. It was mixed Chinese fried rice, and Liz was excited as she had only tasted it once before when Dad had gotten a big bonus from work last year. Dad was 30 years old and was short in stature, born into a middle-class Portuguese family with roots in Madeira. Mum, at 22, was half East Indian and half Amerindian. Her parents died when she was still a small child, and her only brother committed suicide when she was just 16 years old and shortly after meeting Dad. We had no extensive family from Mum's side. Perhaps because of Mum's ethnic mixture, we had never met my Dad's brothers or sisters or their children. The notable exception was Dad's older brother, Uncle Ignatius, who, with his wife and 3 children, Rosita, Terry, and Marcus, lived over the river very far from us in the city. Uncle Ignatius was a radiotrician and had a shop on Durban Street fixing radios. He visited us when we had a broken radio, or every so often on a Saturday after lunch when the shop had closed. It was always exciting when he visited, as he was fond of making funny jokes, and even though he and Dad would end up drinking rum till late into the evening, the jokes would get funnier and funnier, and we were always so sad when he had to go home. Once our family had increased to 4 with the addition of Anthony, and with Mum pregnant again, we got a nanny in the form of the very lovable and matronly Adele. She was of African descent. Whenever we needed something and knew that neither Mum nor Dad would give us, we would ask Adele. She always interceded and pleaded on our behalf, and so we would get what we wanted. We relied on Adele for most things, and it was to her we would run to for protection if we got into trouble and feared a spanking from Mum or a rebuke from Dad. It was just before my 4th birthday when I found a vial-like bottle with some small translucent phosphorine tablets inside. I began eating them, but because of the tropical heat, some had melted a bit and was stuck to the bottom of the vial. And in trying to force my finger to reach the bottom, the glass broke and I got a gash on the inside wrist of my left hand. I don't recall how we got to the hospital, but I do remember Adele comforting me whilst sitting on her lap and my hand heavily bandaged with pieces of a white cotton sheet. When it was near my turn to go into surgery, I was instructed in old colonial fashion to stand at attention in the doorway with my right hand behind my back and my left bandaged arm outstretched to the left, and to look straight ahead and to not make a sound. This I did, and after what seemed like an eternity, a nurse dressed in white came and lifted me up and put me to lie on the operating table that had an outstretched arm where my left arm rested. I remember looking at the bandages as they removed them, and as soon as I saw the blood gushing out, I began to cry uncontrollably. The nurse gently scolded me and told me that there were many sick children resting upstairs, and that if I made a sound I would be disturbing them, and asked me if I wanted to disturb the sick children. I said no, and she gave me a cookie and kept talking to me till it was all over. I had 3 stitches, and to this day, the 1.5-inch scar is still very visible. Even the points where the stitches were are still visible, and it is now officially a distinguishing mark. I didn't know it then, but this was the earliest lesson in altruism that would be reinforced all throughout my childhood, of how you carried yourself in public to reflect good behavior, in taking cognizance of the needs of others, in this case, the sick children upstairs.